Copyright laws apply to all contents of this video. Hello, JOMAJ Studios here, and this is our original fantasy action adventure, Like Water, The Next Age. Episode 12. Most human beings only use about 10% of their brains. I was born into a fairly large society of programmers, born with the ability to use around 40% of our brains. This meant we possessed a unique perspective of the world that allowed us to control various elements of nature, meaning we could cook without stoves, cover great distances without vehicles, and access information without computers. Not that we didn't still use all that stuff. The community I grew up in was a Christian one, made up of people from all over the world, who were found and gathered by our village's founder, who I never saw because he was constantly out looking for people like us. To sense and get to our home was impossible, unless you possessed the ability we were born with. Most programmers' abilities didn't manifest until around the age of 11, and usually meant being able to manipulate one of four base elements of earth, air, water, and fire. Once in a while, you got people who could manipulate more than one element, and I was one of those people. By the age of 5, I was manipulating all four base elements. What can I say? I was a bit of a prodigy. My natural prowess did have its drawbacks in the form of stamina issues, as manipulating all four elements put a lot of strain on my body. Because of this, I was made to become a student of all programming disciplines, which included combat, medicine, architecture, and agriculture. I was 10 years old when they brought her into the village. "What's going on?" I asked, as I saw Derek, one of our youngest and leading scientists, bring in a rough, wild, and dirty-looking girl around my age into the village inside a cage. "Doc found a young beastling and wants to see if he can make it function socially like the rest of us," explained my father, who was a simple man with a passion for agriculture. "Beastling? I thought the modern world had made them extinct," I said to myself. "That was the general consensus, but Doc has gone and found us one," replied my father as he headed off to work, leaving me in a state of fascination. Beastlings were people that survived in the wild from infancy, and as a result acted and lived like wild animals. They were what the Tarzan folktale was based off on. Only in real life, they were far more dangerous. Tarzan in real life was more likely to rip Jane into pieces than start a relationship with her. Beastlings were stronger, faster, smarter, and more agile than any animal. It was said in the jungle, they were on top of the food chain. The beastling was put in a secure safari-type environment created in Derek's institute, which did its best not to look like a cage. "Hello, young Barnabas. What can I do for you?" greeted Derek as I walked into his laboratory. "Hey, Doc, is it okay if I take a look at the beastling?" I asked politely. "Sure," said Derek, taking me to a large, impenetrable window through which I could look into the world Derek had created for her. "Where is she?" I asked, unable to see her anywhere. Before another word could be spoken, the beastling jumped out of nowhere and stared right back at me through the window. She seemed to look at me with the same curiosity as I had for her. "Can she hear us?" I asked. "Yep. I'm hoping a big part of her learning process will come from observing me," answered Derek. "She doesn't seem dangerous," I said. "Looks can be deceiving," said Derek, as he left me in order to carry on with his work. "Hello, my name is Barnabas," I said to the beastling quietly, who in turn just stared at me. "I'm going to call you Eyes because of your clear desire to stare at people. Is that okay?" I said, with Eyes in turn staring at me with an emotionless look. For the next 3 months, my fascination with Eyes grew daily, as after studies I would go over to the institute and talk to her for hours. I would tell her about the fact that I loved medicine and hated combat training, as I thought it was a waste of time, seeing as I had no desire or plan to fight anyone. I also shared the fact that my answer to my stamina problem was simple: focus on one element like everyone else, and of course for me that element was water, as it was the element used by medically focused programmers. Eyes would just stare at me while I spoke, and although she didn't say anything, I was so sure she could understand what I was saying. One afternoon, I took a break from rambling on and took time to stare back at Eyes. I then put my hand on the glass, and she responded by doing the same. Inspired by the fact that the only thing separating our palms from touching each other was the window of her cage, I looked around and noticed Derek had stepped out of the laboratory. I couldn't access the cage through its door. As to do so, I needed Derek's access codes, which I knew he wouldn't give me. So I figured out how to get into I's cage through its ventilation system. When I jumped in, we spent the first 30 seconds just staring at each other, before I's finally ran up and began to mercilessly attack me. The beating she gave me was brutal. I couldn't physically get her off me, and the first blow I received from her left me too injured to utilize any programming techniques. It was worse than being mauled by a bear. If she wasn't biting me, she was stamping on top of me, or she was throwing me around the cage like a rag doll. If Derek hadn't returned to the laboratory when he did and sedated her, I don't think I would have survived the attack. Ice broke most of the bones in my body, which left me bedridden for about 6 months, during which I mastered the art of manipulating the elements without the use of elaborate hand gestures. In the 7th month, my newfound skills allowed me to move around in a wheelchair, which I used to go back to the institute, where I would sit for hours, day after day, filled with rage, staring at eyes who stared back with no emotion or remorse. I felt betrayed because I really believed we had connected. Your dad gave me an earful, and he was right to do so. I shouldn't have left you here unsupervised, said Derek. I didn't respond. All I did was stare at eyes who stared back. I guess we should have taken on board the fact that right now, she's as dangerous as any other animal brought in from the wild, added Derek. 3 days later, Novak, my combat instructor, came to keep me company. Doc told me you and your girlfriend had a bit of a tiff, said Novak as he took a sip beside me. She's not my girlfriend, I answered with a tone that advertised the fact that I was still sulking. When I was a little bit older than you, I met this girl who was gorgeous. All the guys wanted to go out with her. But like a lot of teenage girls who got a lot of attention from boys, she was an expert of shooting guys down. Boy, I couldn't tell you all the ways she said no to me. But eventually, she gave in and went on to become my wife. Do you know why that is? Why? I asked, unable to resist my inquiring mind, despite my mood. Because I took all her crap and then some, but still kept coming back for more, replied Novak. Nice story, I said sarcastically, unable to see its relevance. This poor girl's reasoning is trapped in a world ruled by only primal instincts and violence. If you truly want to connect with her, you can't expect her to speak your language without trying to speak hers, explained Novak. His words pierced my offended heart and inspired a strategy that involved me using everything I had to get my body stronger, faster, more flexible, and more agile. I had begun to take my combat training a lot more seriously, putting a lot of emphasis on defense, counter-attacking, manipulating opponents' weights, pressure points, and being evasive. I also mastered the art of using programming skills to enhance my physical attributes and create constructs with all 4 elements, which I found to be a useful combat skill. I did all this without neglecting spending at least an hour a day having a staring match with eyes. After 2 years, I once again snuck into the cage and stood before eyes. Like before, eyes spent 30 seconds staring at me before attacking relentlessly. This time I was prepared. Eyes like me had grown bigger and stronger, but this time I was able to effectively engage her in hand-to-hand combat, as Eyes was more of a force of nature than a person with fighting skills. We fought all night, and it took every trick I had to successfully keep up with her and leave her cage. For the next year, I would sneak into the institute and do battle with Eyes every night, to the point the fights began to feel less like me risking my life and more like me hanging out with her. One night, while Eyes and I were fighting, she just stopped and stood in front of me. Sorry, said Eyes. Her word hit me harder than any strike I had received from her in the past. You can talk? I responded in shock. That night we both snuck out of the cage and into my home, where she bathed like a person and not an animal. The next day, Derek was in panic because he thought a dangerous beastling was running around the village. Hey Doc, I said as I and Eyes walked into his laboratory. I don't believe it. How? When? Responded Derek, who was beyond amazed. I told him everything I had been doing for the past 2 years, and he in turn facilitated Eyes being integrated into our community. Even though Eyes and I would speak for hours, She refused to talk to anyone else. I guess in her mind, they would always be the enemy because they were happy just to leave her in a cage. In public, we developed a language that involved the subtle movement of our eyes, which was as comprehensive as the use of speech. At this point, our night fights were more pure training sessions, instead of being the only way we could communicate. For the next 7 years, we did everything together, whether it was studying, working in a laboratory, doing chores, or just resting. One day, Ice took me to where she lived before Derek captured her. She shared with me that she has no memory of a family. All she remembered was a life of surviving alone, and then a life of surviving with me. After relaying this, we shared a soft and intimate kiss, which sealed a bond we had that transcended anything I could express in English. That night we returned to the village, only to find it totally destroyed. Everything I knew and everyone I loved was gone. That is the end of episode 12, but before we go, answer this episode's question. Was Derek keeping Ice in a cage inhumane? Give your answers in the comments below, as well as on our Facebook and Twitter page. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. Until then, subscribe to JOMAJ Studio YouTube channel, add us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. Link to our website on all social media can be found in the description box below. See you later.